Magnus, fully armed once more, swung onto his war-horse's back, eager to be on his way. Having his claymore strapped to his back, his skeen-doos up his sleeves, dirk and axe strapped to the belt of his sporran and settled at his hips, small knives in his boots, targe on his forearm, somehow felt natural. He was prepared for battle should it come his way, big or small. Not staying for the feast, they'd be able to make it to Stirling Bridge before sunset, and he wanted to be as far away from the lowlands as possible. That meant crossing the bridge and at least making it into the forest beyond. His men and horses would need to rest then, as they'd been up nearing on 24 hours straight. "Travel well, brother," Lorna said, coming to stand below him. He hated goodbyes. He could recall her as a little girl, wishing him well whenever he'd gone off with their father to settle a dispute or patrol their lands. She always held a bunch of gathered wildflowers in her little hands, thrusting them toward him, promising her flowers would bring him good luck. Magnus touched her cheek. "I always do." Tears shimmered in her eyes, and she held up a sprig of heather. Magnus could not bear to see her cry. He grasped the sprig and tucked it into his boot. With a nod toward Montgomery, he said, "Keep her safe, or I'll have your arse." Montgomery nodded solemnly, taking his pledge to protect Lorna seriously. He stepped forward, grasping a whopping sack with scrumptious scents emanating from it, and strapped it to Magnus' saddle. "Your feast from cook," Lorna said. "My thanks." Magnus gripped the reins and turned his horse toward the gate. "Be well." Once over the wooden drawbridge, he and his men pressed the horses into a gallop. He did not look back. As the eldest Sutherland brother, and their parents long dead, all 4 of his siblings were his responsibility. He just hoped he was doing right by Lorna. He had to believe he was. She was happy. Montgomery was a strong man. He'd care for her and their unborn child. "We ride to Stirling. I want to cross the bridge and camp in the woods beyond before nightfall," he shouted to his men. If they rode hard, they could make it there within 4 or 5 hours. The only show of their agreement was their horses thundering alongside him. An hour into their retreat and about halfway to Stirling, the air around them changed. Magnus couldn't put his finger on it, but something wasn't right. He held his hand in the air, signalling for his men to stop. They formed a half-circle on either side of him, each pulling their claymores ready for an ambush. Examining the wooded area and the road ahead, each of them sought signs of danger. Then it hit him. There were no birds chirping. Odd, since the road they travelled was covered on the left by a full-fledged forest. One he'd noted on the way to Glasgow was particularly loud with feathered creatures. He did not recognise the sounds of the English he'd heard when they were last attacked. No clinking of metal, not stamp of horses' hooves. He sniffed the air. It smelled different than when they travelled through early in the morning, more earthy. He smelled smoke. "There's a fire somewhere," he said. A big one from the scent. Looking above the trees, he didn't see any signs of smoke. "Over there," Donald said. Magnus turned toward where his retainer pointed. To the right of the road was a long hill, and beyond that a small village, where black smoke rose into the air.